Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Lower Decks, Season 1, Episode 7, Much Ado About Boimler. So this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Lower Decks. You'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Lower Decks up to Season 1, Episode 7. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So usually I don't like to get into like personal details in my reviews, but I think it kind of is relevant here because I had surgery on Monday and I'm still recovering from that surgery. It was to remove some kidney stones. It was very, very painful afterwards. I was on very heavy painkillers, and at the moment I still feel very awful, basically. I feel very dizzy, nauseous, really out of it. And the reason why I bring this up in this review over the Star Trek episode, because I do think it is highly probable, I would say, that the crappiness that I'm feeling affected my viewing of this episode. That if I watched this episode when I was feeling great and there was nothing wrong with me and I was in a very good, happy mood, ready to watch comedies, maybe I would have thought very differently of this episode, and maybe I'm just being too hard or too dim. My view is too dim on this episode because of the way I was feeling, because it's harder. I mean, in some ways you think like when you're feeling awful, you want to watch a comedy to take your mind off of things, but on the other hand, it might have the comedy has a harder job because you're not really predisposed to laugh. You just feel like shit, which I think might be the case here, or maybe not. Maybe if I watch this episode in a week or two, maybe I'll feel exactly the same about it. I don't know, but I feel, in the interest of full disclosure, that I should mention that if there are some people out there who love this episode or thought it was fine, might be like, oh my god, Mark, why are you being so hard on it? Well, maybe that's why. Yeah, because I'm recovering from surgery and I don't feel well, and this episode did not amuse me. Now, I think I would say that this is easily the worst episode of the season so far. I thought this is a huge regression. I think this is from a technical writing standpoint. This is clearly the worst written episode. There was no structure to it. There was no plot. It relied on cliches. And maybe it's just my sensibility, maybe my mood or whatever, but I didn't find this humorous at all. Not really. And because it relied on tired, easy, seen before jokes that weren't really funny, and it did absolutely nothing. This episode was terrible at character development. I'm talking about the main characters, the guest characters, all the characters. They felt like they had no real structure behind them other than cliches or repeating things that we've seen on this show before. And it's because here's the thing, because when the first two episodes of Lower Decks came out, people complained, especially the first one, that it had too much kinetic energy, that it was too lightning fast, that it didn't give time to breathe, and the characters were just like all over the place, and then they go from plot to plot and joke to joke way too fast, and you don't have a time to get a handle on anything. And I think that was the case in the first couple episodes to a degree, but I thought the show got much better at that as the show went on, of slowing things down, having a very coherent plot, a very coherent structure. I think Moist Vessel, which is still my favorite episode, I think does the best job at that. That had and even last week's episode, which I had a few complaints about, I still thought it was a strong episode because it had a very strong structure and plot, and you got a handle on the characters, and they didn't just speed through things too fast. Where I thought this episode was like the first two episodes on steroids. It went down way too fast. Like all those new guest characters that came in, I don't know who any of them are. I didn't get a handle on them or the relationship with Mariner outside of the cliche of old friends. That's all I know about it because that's all they've really developed. And their interactions just seem to go by way too fast. Not even to get into the whole Boimler storyline, which was just a cliche. It was just a cliche. There was nothing there. There was no characterization there. It was just one giant cliche. And so I thought this was the most sloppily written episode. None of the jokes really landed with me, and again, that might have been my mood, because when I saw the preview to this episode last week, there was one joke I thought was hilarious, and I didn't think it was funny this time just because I'd already seen it, which is the problem with revealing. I talked about Lower Decks does this a lot. They reveal their funniest jokes in the commercials and the previews, and then so when you get to the actual episode, although there's been episodes like Moist Vessel, I think is a great example, again getting back to my favorite episode, that had some funny jokes in the preview, but it had even more funny jokes that weren't in the preview. So I was like blindsided by, there's a lot of great stuff. Whereas this episode had one funny joke, and that joke was in the preview. And I'm referring to the part where Boimler is like glowing and making that transporter sound. He goes on the bridge and tries to act like normal. Not everything's normal, and he's like, this is no biggie, and Mariner's like, I think this is kind of a biggie. Like that was a funny joke. I like that. I think that went well with their characters, that Boimler just like want to be nonchalant and impress everyone, where Mariner is that goes along with her character, where she'd be like, no, this is kind of a biggie. Like, that was funny. But again, I already saw that joke, so there wasn't really anything else here. Now, counter argument, because that could be the argument of why maybe I just didn't like this episode, because I was feeling like crap and I was in a bad mood. But a counter argument to that is when also in the preview last week, they showed the dog and how like it would like transform, and Tindy was like, I built a dog, and the whole joke is that she's not human, so she doesn't really know how the dog works, so she built it all weird. And when I saw that in the preview last week, I did not think that was the least bit funny. So that's not just my crappy mood this week of why I didn't find that funny. Last week when I was in a fine mood, it was before surgery and all that, I still didn't like it. So that I don't think is dependent on how I was feeling. That I think is just, to me personally, maybe other people find that hilarious, but to me, there's nothing about that I find funny. In fact, when they had it as the opening sequence where Tindy came in with the dog, and it was like, look at the dog, it's all normal, and then it starts climbing the walls and being like a spider, and everyone's freaked out. Like, I was hoping that this would be an example of one of those teasers, those opening scenes that has nothing to do with the rest of the episode. That was it. That was the only thing we'd see from that dog. And so when I found out that it was in the rest of the episode, I was highly disappointed, because I knew it wouldn't be funny. And guess what? It wasn't. Like, this never paid off for me. Like, at the end when the dog was talking and Tindy's like, don't all dogs talk? And I feel like that was supposed to be some big payoff or something, which I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it interesting. There's nothing. I mean, yeah, I get the joke. Tindy's Orion. She doesn't know what dogs are like, and so she's building something. And then at the end, she sees an actual dog and doesn't realize, what does it lick me and whatever. Like, I get the joke. I just don't think it's funny. Like, especially in its execution. Now, the one thing you might say, if you're familiar with my reviews, because this episode did went to correct something that I've been complaining about, especially complaining about it last week, that I was sick of the standard story plot of Tindy and Rutherford going off and having a subplot, and they fixed that this week because it was Tindy and Boimler, and then Mariner had her own subplot and Rutherford was kind of just there. And so you think, well, there you go, Mark. They mixed it up a bit. But I don't think it helped. I don't think they did an interesting way, because we didn't really get character interactions between Boimler and Tendi. Like, I don't know any more about their relationship or how they relate to each other from this episode than I did before this episode, because basically, I mean, Boimler, even though they were in the same subplot, they were basically doing their own thing. Like, Boimler was worried about the freaks and glowing and stuff, and Tendi was just chasing after her dog. And they interacted somewhat in that, but you didn't get any more of a handle on how these two characters interact. And yeah, so let me jump from the plots. Let me start with something I actually did like about this episode, and that's a joke. Actually, I think I gotta correct myself, because I said there were no funny jokes. There was one joke I thought was kind of funny, outside of the one I already mentioned that they showed in the preview, and that is having Captain Freeman, Commander Ramson, and Security Chief Guy go off on a mission, and then there's a substitute captain coming on board. And this is, of course, very reminiscent of the TNG episode Chain of Command. In fact, they had them dress up in those black ops, like completely black hoods and black things that Crusher, Worf, and Picard wore. And again, you have 3 senior officers going off to do this covert ops mission, which didn't really make sense in Chain of Command. And I think they kind of highlighted how it's kind of ridiculous to do it here. Just send off the 3 major senior officers. And then Mariner even called this out. Like, maybe this was a slightly bit too on the nose for me, but they called it out how they were getting a replacement captain. She's like, oh, this replacement captain's gonna jellicoe things up around here, because of course it was the direct. I mean, that really hammered it home. Of course, it was the direct callback to Captain Jellicoe taking over the Enterprise in Chain of Command. Now, what I liked about this joke, first of all, I liked how they were pointing out the ridiculousness of the 3 senior officers just fucking off and having a replacement captain come in, because that never made any sense to me. I still to this day think they should have just put Riker in command of the Enterprise, but whatever. And then having when we find out what their mission actually is, like Freeman and the others, they're just sitting there growing plants, which I thought that's a funny joke. I did like that. I did think that was funny that they went all off on this secret covert ops important mission. It was just to sit there and watch plants grow, which is very in keeping, of course, with the theme of the show, where this is a less important ship and less important characters. And so I thought that was good use of that. So that was probably the one joke I did like about this episode. But when we get to the meat of the storylines in this episode, first let me go at the Boimler storyline first, because this just felt, I don't know, because here's the thing. When I watch this show, and there's a lot of episodes, Moist Vessel's another one I'm going to keep bringing up, but a few other episodes that were decent, even last week's episode, I feel like I'm watching a Star Trek show. It's got the same sort of structure and Star Trek feel of it. Now, I do grant it some leeway of being a animated comedy, so some things are going to be a bit more over the top than if I was watching an episode of Next Generation or Deep Space Nine. That's fine, no problem with that. But there are some cases where they depart too much from that, and it's too over the top and doesn't feel like Star Trek at all. And this was probably the worst case with the Boimler storyline, because I couldn't buy that Starfleet had this division of evil, evil cantankerous people who they just send the freaks off. Now, granted, you might say, well, Mark, the big reveal at the end of the episode was that there was a huge resort and they were treating them nice. Well, okay, fine, but the whole bit when they were like in a crazy, same Silent Arkham type situation was just a ruse. I mean, you can say, oh, that's just done for comedy, ha ha ha. But it still actively bothered me. And plus, like, simply that they would take something like that would happen to Boimler, that the doctor would simply like eject him and be like, "Oh, you're hopeless. Let's send you off with the freaks." And why did Tendi go? Just because they wanted to send her dog? I mean, that was an obvious like experiment. Like, I didn't get that part, and I didn't get any, like, this is part of the thing with everything happened in this episode like so damn fast, like boom, 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 where there was no logic to any of it, and. Because if you think of an episode where there's the transporter accident, let's think of there's a Next Generation one called Realm of Fear with Barclay, and he had a transporter accident. At first, no one believes him, but then they realize his arm starts growing blue. So how do they treat Barclay? Do they like call in the freak specialist and send him out in a resort to just sit the day? Oh well, he's screwed. No, they like try everything they can. The doctors like try very hard to figure out what's wrong, figure out how to reverse it, and they figure out it has something to do with like this main plot. But here, like, so I don't know, that actively bothered me, how they just gave up on Boimler and like, whatever, you're just being annoying and glowy, and not treating him like a victim of an accident like they should. It's like they had zero sympathy for him. You know, granted, again, I don't think the fact that they're sending him to a resort fixes any of that. I don't think that they're sending him into resort. I don't think that helps. I think that doesn't excuse their behavior. They still should have acted differently. They still should have been more compassionate and more willing to figure out what went wrong. And I praise this show in the past for being nonchalant about some of the crazy over-the-top shit that goes up in Star Trek, but I didn't like in this example how nonchalant they were, that Rutherford simply made this glowing guy and they didn't investigate it more, and they didn't try to figure out what was wrong, and Rutherford got off scot-free, and he was acting like it was no biggie, to quote this episode. And so I was stuck on that point for the rest of the and the rest of the storyline. Here's the thing: this, again, unlike some of the previous episodes, did not feel Star Trek at all. It felt like a normal cliche animated cartoon comedy, and not a good one, mind you. It didn't feel like Archer or BoJack Horseman or The Simpsons or a good animated comedy. It felt like one of those throwaway ones that only last a year, that just throw out the normal cliches that you've seen in every animated comedy before. That's what this whole storyline with the freaks or whatever felt like to me. It was very by the numbers. It was very uninteresting. It was just cliche to death. And there was nothing about it I liked. Oh yes, they had that one alien guy who was the same species as Erex from the animated series. You know, good reference, whatever. But it doesn't help. It doesn't matter. I still like really didn't like that. I just did nothing about that storyline I liked. And I really thought, because the concept when I saw the commercial of Boimler like glowing and being phased out, like that was an interesting concept. I thought they were going to do something interesting with it, have them investigate it, have it, do some interesting character stories. But instead they just did a very cliche throwaway bullshit storyline. It's just not funny. Alright, so let's get into the Mariner storyline. And this, speaking of cliche, we've seen this storyline on the show like a couple times already. Yes, Mariner doesn't want to get promoted. Yes, she's going to do everything she can to not get promoted. We've seen this like several times before, but much better. Like, again, the episode Moist Vessel, which I thought was a hilarious episode, where she hated being a senior officer. Well, here she has like a dear old friend who comes on board, and again, as I said before, I got no handle on the character, and the storyline just happens so damn fast. They just go boom, 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 boom through the things. Like, I don't know why on this bald planet, why they come across this other ship and they act like, oh, this is Captain blah blah, she owes me a favor. It's like, who is that? Like, I got very confused as to what was going on. And it felt like, and again, you could say maybe it's because I'm disorientated from my surgery or whatever, but I still feel like it's just kinetic energy. It's just happened way too fast. I got no handle on the characters. We're just getting this cliche storyline with Mariner that we've already seen several times before. It's really hammering. This is like beating the dead horse cliche. She hates being a senior officer. We get it. Like, and the way that I thought it was interesting at first the way that she was constantly fucking up, because I thought, wait a second, this goes against the way this is like. This doesn't make any sense for her character, because we've seen her character so far, she gets everything perfect. She's almost perfect to a flaw, which some people will point out that she's so great at everything, and now she's fucking up. But of course, they reveal at the end of the episode that she's fucking up on purpose because she doesn't want to get promoted and move over. And that was very disappointing to me, because again, this is just hammering home, is beating a dead horse. It's hammering home the same information we already knew. And plus, if she was good friends with this captain, then why didn't she just outright say, look, I don't want to be your first officer, I'm happy here, blah blah blah. I mean, they maybe she didn't feel like she could outright and say it, but it feels like if they really did have a relationship, there could have been a better way to do it than her just pretending to fuck everything up, because it's the same plot we've seen before with her over and over again. I'm frankly, I'm fucking sick of it, and I'm starting to not buy that she desperately wants to remain innocent that badly. Like, I think they're making it it's like, so the basic concept I can buy, I can believe, but because they keep hammering it home to such an absurd extent, it's making it harder for me to buy it and to believe it. And basically, I don't think it's funny. Anyway, my rating for Much Ado About Boimler out of 10. I'm going to give this episode a 3. Very poor. I think this is the first really bad rating I've given an episode from this show. And maybe it's because I'm in a bad mood and feel like crap. But maybe if I actually saw a decent episode when I was feeling like crap, maybe it would make me feel better. I don't know. I think this is sloppily written. I think it was just cliches. It was not funny. And it was just repeating the same story beats over and over again without adding anything new to the show. And I hope the next couple episodes are better than this one. Anyway, that's it for my review of this episode. Be sure to check out my further reviews of Star Trek Lower Decks. I also cover many other shows on this channel, including The Boys, many other Star Trek shows, The Expanse, BoJack Horseman, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.